let's start where we finished last time. Because as you're beginning to catch this pattern now, the very best way to see where a book is going is to take a look at where we've come from, because they all fit together. And trajectory of how the last one ended gives us a really good head start where we're going. So in the book of Joshua, the very last chapter, we saw that the land had been given. Many verses there that say, and God had fulfilled his promises of land. We also know, of course, that we'd already done the nation thing in the book of Exodus. And so as we finished last time, we said, well, maybe this is the time for the leader, right? And the book of Joshua finishes in such an amazing way. Chapter 24 and verse 32 does this. It says, and Joseph's bones, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem in the tract of land that Jacob bought for 100 pieces of silver from the sons of Hamor. Now, someone might think that's just sort of a little historical footnote, but you, since you're really informed now, you know it's not a historical footnote because you know who Joseph is. Right? Joseph is not just any guy. Who is Joseph? Joseph is the guy. Joseph is the very best picture of the leader that we have so far. So it's really ironic or strategic or genius, actually, for Joshua to say, okay, we got land, we got nation, and let's see how we doing it. Oops, he's kind of dead. All we have are bones. All we have are bones. Let's see, do we need a leader? And verse 32 that talks about Joseph really points to this box and says, you know, that box is like really empty. We need a leader with skin on him. We need a leader in the flesh. Is that what we're going to get this time? And so that's kind of the introduction for Judges, looking for that leader. Right? So let me talk to you about structure a little bit. Structure is always important. Comes in different ways, but it's always important. And in this book, well, in all the books, it's the nifty way the author helps us understand the major pieces of his book. And so, in this book, there are three major parts. The first one is a really scary preview of the book. Because if you look at those first three chapters, you say, oh my goodness, is the whole thing going this way? If it does, it's going to be bad. And as it turns out, it is. Right? There's reason to be scared. Then in 3 to 16 is a downward spiral of the judges. Actually, the only place where the judges show up is here in 3 to 16. And then we finish with two perfect stories. Now, when I say perfect, I don't mean good. I mean like perfect as in the perfect storm, right? This is they perfectly show what the book is going after, and oh man, is it dark, okay? And that's the basic structure. So, real quick note here before we get into it. The judges are neither chronologically consecutive nor geographically comprehensive, whatever that means. What it means is this, that as you move through the book of Judges, it's not always true that the judge in chapter 11 comes after the judge in chapter 10. There's been a little bit of a rearrangement of the stories in order to make the story better. And when I say geographically comprehensive, I don't mean that every judge rules over all of Israel. Sometimes they'll just rule over a little small section, okay? But that doesn't really matter. What this does say to us is this. This is another reason not to treat this as a strict history of the period. Again, I know that horse is really dead by now, but that historical, moral, and theological, it is not just history. If you approach it as, okay, there's the facts, I got to learn about what happened, you miss the real point. This is telling us a much better story by rearranging the history a little bit. So, it is a crafted literary work with messages to tell, so we're going to pay really close attention and see if we can start to hear what that message is. And in Joshua had kind of conquered about this area. And when he did that, he didn't, again, as we said with the story of Caleb, he did not conquer every last spot. What he did was kind of break the major coalitions. So when he then divides the land up into 12 sections, what he's saying is, okay, each of you 12 tribes, now you go into your little area and you conquer it and settle it. Okay? And so that's kind of where we are here as the book of Judges opens. So let's take a look at the first three chapters, that scary preview. And we're going to start like this. Chapter 1, Israel's failure to drive out the inhabitants. Now, let me get I want to get your Bibles open in whatever format you want to. I'm going to get mine open, and I'm going to start like this. Judges chapter 1, and kind of a famous statement here that after the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, "Who will be the first to go up and fight for us against the Canaanites?" The Lord answered, "Judah is to go. I have given the land into their hands." Now, the beautiful part about this is when we just, boom, drop right down into the book, things are going well for a number of reasons. Number one, it's always a great thing to ask direction from God. Right? So kudos for 1-1. They go up and they ask the Lord, who will be the first one to go fight, right? And then God answers, verse 2, Judah is to go, I've given the land in their hands. And again, that makes total sense to us, right? Because Judah is the leader tribe. So it's like, okay, we're talking to God. God's giving answers. Things are going really well. And you read down through the first several verses, and Judah conquers this land and takes Jerusalem back from the Jebusites. It's really, really good. Things are going really, really well, right? So we get off to a good start. But then there's an oops in verse 19. And the oops is simply this. The Lord was with the men of Judah. They took possession of the hill country, but were unable to drive out the people from the plains because they had iron chariots. Now, that should be a huge red flag, right? Because you should say, wait a minute. These iron chariots, we're talking about the Philistines. Those are probably bad, but are those worse than the walls around Jericho? And you begin to realize what the writer is doing for you here is not necessarily giving you the reason, but maybe giving you an excuse. Kind of helping you get into what they would have said. Well, we just can't do that because of those iron chariots. That should be a little bit of a red flag. Like, what's going on here, right? And here's the second red flag. What happens next is the Benjamites do the same thing. They failed to dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. Now, the really weird thing about this is, in a couple of verses before, they had conquered the Jebusites. You say, well, hadn't they conquered? Yeah, they did, but the Jebusites must have gotten back. And the Benjamites couldn't kick them out. And then, as you keep going down through here, the Manasseh did not drive out the people of Beth-shan. And these people didn't drive out, and they didn't drive out, and they didn't drive out, and they didn't drive out, all the way down through here. Like, whoa, this big cascade of failure to do this. Now, the question as you read it over is you say, okay, I wasn't there, I don't know. Was it really their fault, or were those iron chariots just so bad that they couldn't be expected to do it on their own? Well, I mean, if you really want to know the answer, you go into chapter 2 where God actually gives his evaluation of how they did. So is God going to say, nice try, but you didn't quite get it, or it's the best you could do, we'll give you a B+? Or what does he give them? And you see there in chapter 2, God says this, I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars, yet you have disobeyed me. Right? Why have you done this? And so as God looks at chapter 1, he says, look, this is not a matter of inability. This is a matter of failure to trust, and you have in fact disobeyed. Right? So this is a bit of a scary preview, which leads us then to this. Some self-destructive patterns of operation in chapters 2 and 3. And we can summarize it like this. Verse 11, again, is giving us a preview of what's going to happen. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. Now, it might seem funny to see Baals in plural, but there was a different version of Baal wherever you happen to be in the country. Right? So we had our version of Baal, and you had your version of Baal, so it's referred to in the plural, the Baal. And then what happens is this, verse 14. In his anger against Israel, the Lord handed them over, and so they are oppressed, right, as a discipline to cause them to come back. Then, verse 15, they were in great distress, and they cry out to God, which then leads to this, verse 16, the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Now, that little cycle of sin, oppression, distress, and deliverance keeps going and going and going, right? In our little overview, we said there's a series of ups and downs. Yeah. Now, That's good for a general statement in the walkthrough, but technically, it's not simply ups and downs. And the reason why it's not ups and downs is because of this, again, very ominous verse right here, verse 19. So can you look at verse 19 and tell me why ups and downs isn't really totally accurate way to describe this? Right, so you see where we're going with this? A better way to describe it instead of ups and downs is what? It's this downward spiral. So you ready for the animation that's going to change your life today? Are you ready? Hold on, here it goes. When you see this chart, the way I want you to think of it is even more corrupt and, oh, isn't that cool? One more time. Maybe even again, right? You're just going down the drain here, right? So it's like this downward spiral. It's not just ups and downs. It's like every time we get worse and worse and worse and worse. Now, the reason why I give you the silly animations and I do it for you 3 times is because I don't want you to forget it. Because most people don't believe it. Let me tell you, it is absolutely true. And when we start going down that spiral, your natural reaction is, no, that's not true. And I'm going to say, I told you so. We're really going down. So when we look at these judges, and I haven't put all of them up here, but just for example, Ehud, Deborah, Jephthah, Samson, you should understand things are getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Because a typical way to approach the book of Judges is to make heroes out of these people. And you're going to see they're really, really not. Okay? So let's jump into it, and here's what we're going to do. I'm going to move through the stories. I'm going to tell you the stories, not because it's Dr. Miller's story time, but because the writer gives us the stories. And the way for the truth to really sink into your soul is to understand the stories and to compare the stories so you can follow his thought process. I'm going to give you a little bit of help, okay? I am not going to just say everything you need to know. I'm going to say it in such a way that if you dig for it and you think about it, you can put it together. The reason I do that is because if you put it together, if you process it, if you think about it, you will own it much, much better than if I just tell you. So I'm going to help you. I'm going to point you to the right stuff and say, look at that, and I want you to find it, okay? So here's the help. The help is this. Look for progress from one story to the next, but ask yourself, what changes take place? Notice the details of all the stories so you can compare and notice the progress. The second thing is I want you to think about your own affective response. Right now, I say not effective, affective, your affections. How does the story make you feel? Now, you may have been taught to not trust that, but I'm telling you, you should. The writer is trying to get you to feel something in your gut. How does that story make you feel? How do you like reading that stuff? Is it enjoyable? Do you find it interesting? Do you find it humorous? How does it make you feel? Because the writer's trying to evoke those emotions, and he will if you let him. And number 3, how does the role of women relate to the main theme? Really, really incredibly powerful. I'm not making this stuff up. This is really there. How does the role of women relate to the main theme? So, I will ask you those things after every story and give you a chance to review and think it through. And so let's just start then with the first story. God's mercy in delivering, and Othniel is the first deliverer, and I'm going to call him Mr. Short and Sweet, Aksah's hero. As you remember, that's Caleb's daughter, Aksah. And in the story, it tells us this. It says, if I can show it to you here, this is the story of Othniel. Obviously, you can tell because the heading says Othniel. See that right there? Okay. So it starts out, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, right? And that's the very first indication of the beginning of the cycle. The same phrase we saw in 2:11. They did evil, right? Then the anger of the Lord burned against the Israelites so that he sold them. That's the second part, sin, distress. But when they cried out, that is sin, oppression, and then distress, right? The Lord raised up for them a deliverer, and that's the salvation that he gives to them as he raises up the deliverer. So you see the little cycle right there very quickly. And then what happens, of course, is simply this. Let me just read the statement. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him so that he became Israel's judge and went to war. The Lord gave the king of Aram, of Syria, into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. So the land had peace for 40 years until the Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. Now, as you first look at that, you think, well, that's not a very interesting story. It just happens. Trust me, by the time we get through all the other stories, you're going to go back and look at this with different eyes, and you're going to say, wow, that was really cool. And what was cool about that was God raised him up. He went and did the job. It wasn't messy. It was clean. God gave them power, and it was great, right? Because it really, really is. By the way, we did kind of skip the story here where in the first chapter where Caleb says, whoever conquers this mountain, I will give my daughter Aksah to him in marriage. Now, I don't know how your first response is to that story. You probably look at that and think, well, that's kind of crude, right? It looks like the guy is just trying to get a job done and he's selling his daughter to do it. But I don't think that's what's going on at all. When you look at this in the whole book, I think Caleb was really smart, and I think Caleb really loved his daughter. And I think what he was doing was given a pretty good test for the kind of guy he wanted to be his son-in-law. Right? He said, I don't want some schmoozer. I don't want some guy who's just full of charm. I want somebody who will trust and do courageous things for God. And that's the kind of guy I want to marry my daughter. Right? And evidently, Aksah was the kind of woman who would inspire a man to do great things. Ladies, you can inspire us to do good things or bad things, and she was the kind that would inspire him to do great things, right? And so Othniel and Aksah get married, and you think, okay, big deal. What's so special about that? It's the only place in the entire book where an Israelite woman marries an Israelite man and have a blessed marriage. Because everything starts going downhill. So let's take a look at it, and let's take a look at the second story then, okay? Is there progress? No, it's the first story. How does it make you feel? Not very much yet. How are women treated? Well, she marries this nice guy. Big deal? Well, hold on until the next story, okay? Let's go to Ehud, the lone deliverer in chapter 3. Now, the story of Ehud is this, the story of the left-handed Lone Ranger. I say that because he actually is left-handed. How many left-handers do we have here today? Oh, look at you guys. Man, and you're all raising your left hand. That's so sweet. Sometimes people say, I'm left-handed, and think, why are you? You're left-handed? Really? I'm writing with my left hand. Okay, all right, whatever. But what difference does it make that he's left-handed? And the answer is because he hides his sword on the opposite thigh, the opposite leg, that most right-handers do. So when it came time for Eglon's security guards to frisk him, they're not the brightest crayons in the box, and they frisk him on the wrong side. He sneaks the sword in, and that's kind of what makes the story work. Okay? So he's a left-handed guy. He works by himself, which makes him like only one other judge. We'll see in a minute. And here's the way the story goes. You see the Jordan River there. You see the Dead Sea. Israel's here. Moab is up here. And Ehud is the judge in Israel. And Eglon is the king of Moab. Eglon, think of a big egg on a lawn, and you can remember his name. The irony is that his name actually means fatted calf, like he's ready for the slaughter. But actually, as the story goes on, it tells us that he is a very fat man. Now, before you start thinking about fat shaming and how gross or crude this is, let me give you the cultural background to why this is such a big deal. He's been oppressing Israel for a long time, and when that oppression takes on a tangible form, the tangible form is he takes the money, he takes the taxes, takes the goods from Israel. He literally kind of rapes the country of all their economic prosperity, and that's why he's fat, because he's eating it all up. Not just him, but his whole kingdom. And the other side of the story is little kids in Israel, you can see their bare ribs showing through because he's eating all their food. Right? So that's part of the story. It's not just about, he's fat, right? It's not 21st century values put back there. Right? So anyway, the way the story goes is Ehud goes in, and as we said before, he sneaks his sword in. And just so you know that I am not making this stuff up, right? I want to read the text exactly as it goes. Right? I'm not making it up. He strapped this 1.5 foot long sword to his right thigh, and he presented the tribute, the money, to Eglon, king of Moab, who was a very fat man. Yes, he was. He was a very fat man. Right? So he goes to the king and he says, gives him the money, and then he says, I have a message, secret message for you, O king. King said, quiet. And all his attendants left him. It's like, oh, secret message, just for you. And so let's go to this private area where no one else is around so I can give you the secret message. Right? And so he does. I have a message from God for you, and he really does. Right? He reaches for the sword. He drew the sword from his right thigh and plunged it into the king's belly and said, here's my message. Do you get the point? See? Okay. And Eglon says, I get the point. Now, am I being too gross? Not really, because the next verse says, sorry about this, even the handle sank in after the blade, which came at his back. Now, you might be saying at this point, that's enough, too much information. No, not enough. Here's more. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. Ooh, just gross. Why does he tell us that? Why do we need to know that he was so fat that it's... I don't need that mental picture, right? Why did he tell us that? Well, then it gets even worse, because Ehud went out and he locks the doors, and notice this. After he'd gone, the servants came out and found the doors of the upper room locked. They said he must be relieving himself in the inner room of the house. They waited to the point of embarrassment. Now again, I'm not making this up. What they're saying is, oh man, the old guy must be having a hard time today. You know, we're going to have to put more bran in his diet, more fiber or something. And again, this is really embarrassing. I don't want to knock on the door. No, you knock on the door. No. And it's like, oh, this is really embarrassing. We're afraid he's hurt. And so we finally knock on the door and, oh my goodness, this is why he's dead. This is why there's such a smell, right? And so by that time, Ehud has come back, and because they're in such disarray because their king is, dead, Ehud, and because of the help of God, overcomes the Moabites and rescues them from them. Now, look at that story. What kind of movie rating would this story deserve? I mean, if you were going to you're going to display this movie in all of its glory, what would it deserve? And a better question is this. If you were the marketing director for this film, to whom would you market this story? What kind of audience would enjoy this? And my guess is this is like a 7th grade boy mentality, don't you think? Oh yeah, I put the blade in there and the fat, this is great. This is like 7th grade boy. This is kind of, in some ways, kind of demeaning. It's kind of earthy, right? So what kind of change or progression do you see? Well, the progression in Othniel and this one's, again, a little messier, right? How does it make you feel? Well, in some ways it's kind of humorous in a base, earthy sort of a way, but you can kind of laugh at it because it's this bad guy who, gets his just desserts, and that's okay. I don't know. And then how are women treated? The answer here is, well, I don't think there are any women in the story yet, so not a big deal, right? You say, okay, I don't see much to work from here. Well, this is just the second point. Wait till we get several points, and you'll start to see where we're going. So that's that story. Let's go on to the next one. All right, the next one, of course, is the story of Deborah, the female deliverer, subtitled Jael and Her Deadly Nails. If you've read the story, this is a story about Barak. Okay, Barak is how shall I describe him? He is a male, but not a man. Maybe that's the way to describe him. I don't know. But let me just say that the reason I say that is because when Deborah comes to him and says, I want you to go, God wants you to go lead the armies, you see what his response is, right? It's pretty famous. Verse 8. If you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go. Now again, be a critical reader. Does he have some reason for saying that? Yeah, he does. He's a big chicken, right? And you look at that and you think, Deborah's here sitting thinking, wait a minute, I'm the woman, you're the man up, dude, right? Just go. But she says, okay, very well, I will go with you, but because of the way you're going about this, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will hand Sisera over to a woman. right? Now, at that point, you assume it's going to be her, right? Because she's the woman in the story, but as it turns out, she is not. It is the woman named Jael. And her story is found very quickly right here. Sisera, who was the enemy general, fled on foot because Barak did do a good job in the battle, right, where he went. And Sisera, the enemy general, comes to the tent of Jael. So, verse 18, Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in, don't be afraid." Now, and you just read that, you would think, like he did, oh, this is a safe place for protection. But from the very beginning, she knows what she's doing. So he entered her tent, and she put a covering over him to protect him from the bad guys, right? "I'm thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." She opened a skin of milk. Stop right there. Notice the details. He asked for water. She gives him milk. Oh, milk is better, tastes better, right? No. He asked for water. She didn't give it to him. She gave him milk. Why? Because she's thinking all the time. Covered him up. "Stand at the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If somebody comes by and asks you, is anyone here?" Say no. "Okay, all right, we'll work on that." But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg, I'm sorry about this, through his temple into the ground, and he died. Well, I guess so. I mean, she doesn't just drive it in. It's like it goes all the way into the ground, so in case he wakes up, it's like he's stuck. You know? Sorry, but that's what the text is saying here, right? Now, you look at this whole story and you say, wait a minute. When she said, "Come on in here, you're safe," she was just getting him to let his guard down because she knew what she was going to do. And the fact that she gave him milk, well, you tell me, why does she give him milk? Because she's a mom and she knows when little tykes have been playing real hard all day long and you give them milk and cover them up, what do? They go fast asleep. So you can sneak in, right, and nail them to the floor. Now, oh geez, I gotta. So here's the picture, and this is the ancient modern art. It's so funny the way people say, what does this story mean? And you look at this, and a lot of people read this story and they come up with ideas like this, Yeah, or like we need to empower our young women. Okay, fight like Jael. Or I don't even know where this one comes from. I don't want to know. Or even this. Poor Jael. He's just really nailing there. But what does this story mean? Well, here's the beautiful part. Where we're going to go now is we're going to go to chapter 5 because we've actually got the prose here. But as you look at chapter 5, you can see here it says the Song of Deborah because it's poetry. And if you look over this whole chapter, it's all poetry. See the way it's formatted? Now, here's the amazing thing. We'll have a whole day where we talk about poetry. But let me just give you it in one sentence here. Poetry is not something which you skip in the Bible. Poetry is something which succinctly interprets and tells you what's really going on. We tend to think the prose is where you get truth. But Hebrews say, no, let me poetically describe it to you and interpret it and give you the meaning. So the reason why we've got chapter 5 is to help us to really know what's going on. And watch this. Right? When we get to chapter 5, there's all this poetry about how the earth shook and the heavens poured down and how God protected them and all that sort of stuff. But then we get over here to the story of Jael and we find out what really goes on. Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. He asked for water and she gave him milk, right? You see the way they're celebrating this? Like, wow, what a strategic move. She was so smart. He asked for water and she gave him milk. And we find out a few details we didn't even know before. In a bowl fit for nobles, she brought him curdled milk. Now, why would you do that? Why do you give him your best bowl? Because he says, oh, she really thinks I'm something special. I'm really safe. I've really found a friend. Really? Her hand reached for the tent peg, her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera. She crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. At her feet he sank. He fell. There he lay. At her feet he sank. He fell. Where he sank, there he fell. Dead. Now, three times, count them, it says he fell, he fell, he fell. Right? Now, wait a minute. But that's not like chapter 4, because we know deliberately he was not standing up. He was indeed horizontal. He was prone, right, under the covers. So what's going on here? Is this a contradiction? No. This is the beauty. This is the literary genius. This is the poetry which is explaining to us what really happened. Because in ancient Hebrew, the way you talk about one person falling before another, that's a military metaphor. Someone went out and he fell upon him, or he killed him, and as two military figures come, one fell before the other. So what's it saying? What it's saying is this. These two military figures, Sisera and Jael, came together, and he fell before her. So that she is painted in the role here of being the military conqueror. Now, at first you think, okay, that's really great. Here's the military conqueror. Well, just hang on. Just hang on. By the way, why does she have to do this? Why does she have to play the role of military conqueror? The text told us before in chapter 4. Why does she have to do this role? Because Barak said he wasn't going by himself. So he forces her into a role for which she is not prepared, although she actually does a pretty good job. Forced into a role she shouldn't have to play, and we'll talk about that in a second. But right now, what I want to do is introduce you to really important pop culture and simply say this. Did you guys ever tell your mom jokes when you were in 7th grade? You still tell your mom jokes? Okay, you don't want to admit it. Well, I just want you to know that you are not the first generation to do that, neither was mine. Actually, it starts in the Bible. Right? The very first your mom joke happens right here. And here it is, verse 28. Through the window peered Sisera's mother. Behind the lattice she cried. Now remember, this is the dead guy's mom, right? So she's back at home, and she's peering through the window, and she says, where is that boy? Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why is the cloud of his chariot so late? The wisest of her ladies answer her. Indeed, she keeps saying to herself, are they not fine in dividing the spoils? A girl or two for each man. He's not home yet. Where is he? Oh, they're probably just having a great time. A girl or two for each man. Now, the English here is really, really euphemistic. If I told you what it said in Hebrew, I would scandalize you, and you would say, oh, it says that? Yeah. I'll just tell you generally, and you can probably figure it out, this is actually the specific female body part. So it's a really crude statement. Oh, they're out there and those guys are getting this. And all of a sudden, this whole story starts to take on this cruder, more serious, sober tone. And think about this. Now again, I'm not making this up. This is the power of the story in what they're thinking. They're thinking, okay, the boys are out there in some Israelite woman's bedroom under the covers doing what boys do. And you know, and I know, gosh, you know, that's exactly the case. He is in some woman's bedroom under the covers, but she's having her way with him, not the other way around. And suddenly it gets really, it's like, that's a really earthy story. But I tell you what, it gets worse, because watch this. You look at this story right here, and so far we've thought, you know, this is great for her. Let me just say it like this. Is there progress? And this story is, well, yeah, there's progress here. How does this story make you feel? There's a little bit of humor in that Ehud story. This one's a little bit of humor too, but man, this one's much more sobering. And then this one. How are women treated? But before you answer that one, let me tell you this. Where's she going to sleep tonight? This is her bedroom. Where's she going to sleep? There's blood everywhere. Oh, well, she'll just throw the sheets in the washer and the dryer. They'll be fine, right? No. I'm not sure you get all that blood out of the stuff. And besides, when she goes to sleep at night, do you think it just might go through her head, hey, I live in a culture of revenge, and I live in a culture where women are demeaned, and if the story gets out, and it will, that the glory is going to a woman here, do you suppose that his other generals will want to come and exact revenge? And if they do, what will I have to have as a defense? Well, I've got these tent walls. They're really secure, right? She went to sleep every night wondering when the enemy was going to show up. Not only that, but if you've ever studied or read anything about post-traumatic stress syndrome, she just killed a guy. She just crushed his head right there in her own bedroom. How do you think she felt about that? Now, why does she have to do that? Why is she put in this place? This woman is forced to do something that her dad never dreamed or hoped she would do. When I guarantee you, when she was a little girl bouncing on her father's knee, he never said, man, I hope my little girl can go up to bash some guy's brains out right here in her bedroom. Why does she have to do this? Why does she have to live with this? And the answer is because the guy wouldn't stand up and do what the guy was supposed to do in the first place and forced her into the role of having to do something which is going to curse her life for a long, long time. How are women treated? You may think they're treated okay, but trust me, this is a bad thing which Barak has done to her. All right? Now, sorry that's so heavy, but it's only going to get worse. Okay? So let's go on to the next story and take a look at the story of Gideon. Now, I'll give you a little brief respite here. Right? I'm going to talk about Gideon pretty quickly and just say this. You know a lot about the story already, so I'm just going to say two highlights. Two things about Gideon are these. He knows, number one, that the Lord, not Baal, is the God of Israel. And we know that because he actually gets this nickname, Jerubbaal, or he who contends with Baal, or for short, the Baal fighter. And that's good. That's really, really great. He also knows that the Lord, not Gideon, is the king of Israel. That's really, really good because in chapter 8, they come to Gideon and they say, Gideon, we want you to be our king. And Gideon is really smart at this point. He says, no. The Lord is your king, not me. You say, well, was having a king a bad thing? Because David is a king? That's not bad, is it? And the answer is no. It all depends on the reason why you want a king. Let me show you, let me graph out the reason, okay? What they had over here on the left-hand side was God as their king. And what the people are saying is, we don't like that. Because if we sin, God allows us to go into oppression. So let's just do this. Let's just get rid of him and let's replace him with you, Gideon, because you're pretty powerful and you're pretty smart and you're pretty successful and you'll not be as harsh on us as he was. Gideon knew that they wanted to replace God with him, and that's why he said, no, I'm not going to do that. Now, what they eventually got with David was this. David was the king in God's place or as God's representative, and this is eventually what they got, and this is a good thing over here, but Gideon knew that isn't what they were asking for. They weren't saying, Gideon, be our king and God the ultimate king, you replace him. And so that's why he said, no, I'm not going to do it. But here's the sad part. You take a look at chapter 8, verses 24 to 35, and you find out this, two things. Number one, he creates an idol to Baal that makes the people stumble. And then he has 70 sons. Now you might think, okay, it's the Old Testament, people had lots of kids. No, not everybody had lots of kids. If you have 70 sons, guess how many daughters you have? You probably have 70 daughters too. Right? So you got 150 kids. How do you do that with one wife? It's kind of hard. What does it take to get 150 kids? It takes, in Old Testament terms, it takes a harem. Who has harems in the Old Testament? Kings. In fact, he names one of his kids Abimelech. Abimelech simply means Avi Melech, my daddy is king. Right? So here's the weird thing. He knows what is right, but the inner tendencies of his heart are bad. So, and it shows up here with this next story about Abimelech. Because Abimelech comes on, again, I'll tell you this story really quickly, and Abimelech actually acts out that Baal is the God of Israel, right? He has people worship Baal. And then, number two, he acts out that he is the king of Israel. So what I want you to see here is this correspondence between Abimelech and his dad, And even though his dad knows what is right and kind of affirms that, in his inner life, he has these tendencies that show up. And so here's the bottom line. Abimelech lives out the tendencies of his father. So, I probably should spend more time on him, but I want to get to this next guy, Jephthah. Jephthah is the impulsive deliverer. Let me describe him in terms of that great theologian Johnny Cash, and describe him as a boy named Sue. Anybody admit that they know the song here? It's a country song. It's a country song about a father who knows he's not going to be around for his boy to train him how to be a man, so he names him logically Sue. Logically in the country music sense. He names him Sue. Why does he name the boy Sue? Because he figures, okay, if I give him a girl's name, everybody will pick on him and he'll have to learn to be a tough guy and stand up for himself. Which is exactly what Jephthah is, right? Jephthah, his mom, is a prostitute, but so he's only a half-brother to the rest of his brothers who pick on him and run him out of the family. But in the process, he learns to, defend himself. So when the family gets in trouble, they say, man, we really need a tough guy. Who should we get? And the answer is, let's get Jephthah, right? So Jephthah comes back as a judge, and on his way out to battle, Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, if you give me the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return, will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. And then verse 39, and he did to her as he had vowed. Now, you know how the story goes. I trust you have read it. Right? When he comes back, his daughter comes out, and he goes, oh, my daughter, you're my only daughter. You killed me here. Actually, he killed her, right? But she says, okay, I know you got to keep your vow, but let me go away for 2 months and mourn the fact I will not have children. Right? So he does, and then she comes back, and the text says he did to her as he vowed. Now, if you will look at a lot of study Bibles, they will say this. They will say, okay, what he did was he sacrificed her figuratively. He sent her to a convent where she would be a nun, right? So that she would never marry. Why do we say that? We say that because even though I told you the spiral is going to go down, a lot of people say, no, that can't be. God, that would be human sacrifice. God hates that. That could not have happened. And I'm saying, no, we're going down. You know what he really did to her? I mean, look at it. The text actually tells you what he did to her. He did to her as he had vowed, and that is he sacrificed her as a burnt offering. He killed her. How do you know? Because the text says he did. But that's wrong. Yes. Have you not figured out that what's happening here is wrong? This is really, really bad. So if you take a look at this and you say, oh my goodness, look, what's the progress from the last story to this? How does this story make you feel? How are women treated? And I'll just give you a quick answer here. You probably figured it out by now. But look at this is the irony of this story, is that the guys who are supposed to protect the girls are the ones they have to be afraid of. It's her dad, for heaven's sake. Heavy story. Yeah, but it just gets worse. So let's go on. All right? Let's go on to a heavier story with this guy. Now, I love this picture because it's so bad. I even brought my own little jawbone here. Such a formidable weapon, just in case anybody attacked me, and I'd be ready. Okay? Don't come after me. This is a good weapon. But even as you look at this story and the sermon series from which this comes from, it's like, oh yeah, look at this guy. Man, that guy was strong. It doesn't matter what he has. He just picks up the jawbone of a donkey. He goes down and kills 1,000 guys. What a great guy he is. Wow, this is amazing, right? And the answer is no. No, you understand nothing about the Old Testament if you look at this story and think, wow, what a tough guy. Because the Israelites would look at this and say, killed 1,000 guys, that's great. But he did it with the jawbone of a donkey? You understand why this is so bad? Because this is totally unclean. This guy is a Nazirite. He's never supposed to touch anything dead. So the true understanding Israelite would read this and say, oh, he did it, but he did it with the jawbone of a donkey. That's a weird story. Yes, absolutely. This is a very complex story. It's a weird story because he does kill 1,000 Philistines here, but he is totally, completely compromised in the process. This guy is not a hero. He is not a hero. In some ways, he's sort of an anti-hero. He's a very, very complex story, right? So let's take a look at it, and let's try not to make him out to be this incredible hero because of these things. Number one, I'm going to call him, first of all, a self-centered deliverer. He has a miraculous birth. His parents can't have kids, and so the angel comes and says, you're going to have a baby boy. Now, just stop right there and ask yourself, how many other people in the Bible do you know who had births that were foretold? Well, Isaac, Jesus, John the Baptizer, Samuel. This is pretty good company, isn't it? So we expect great things out of this guy who's had his birth foretold, and God even makes him out to be a Nazarite, one who is specially dedicated to God. This is what the nurse says to his mom and dad. Congratulations, it's a Nazarite. Not going to touch any grapes because we're going to be in control, not out of control, which is exactly not what he is. He's always out of control. No haircuts because we will be unashamed of our dedication, yet he spends more time in Philistia than he does in Israel. And don't touch any dead things because death and sin are enemies to God. So it would not be a good idea for you to touch dead things, and that's just about all he does is touch dead things. So again, these very complex, weird contradiction. In depth about him, let's take a look at his view of women in chapters 14 and 15. Again, this is part of the reason why I have you study geography just a little bit. Because one time a friend and I, we were in Israel, had some time, and so we decided just to take a hike from where Samson lived in Zoar to Timnah. And we found out it took us about 3 hours to get there, and it was a hot, dusty walk, and we decided, you know, you're not just out for a walk, you are intentionally going there. So when the text says Samson went down to Timnah, that's your first red flag right there. What in the world is he going to Timnah? Why is he going to a Philistine city? And saw there a young Philistine woman. Now, if that's all there was, I wouldn't circle the word saw and color it. But as you read through the whole story of Samson, you begin to realize his eyes are a pretty important part. Right? What eventually happens to his eyes? He loses them. Why? Because he's not using them to begin with. Or because he's using them for the wrong things. Notice again the brevity of the text. He saw a young Philistine woman and returned home and said, Mom and Dad, I have to have her. Does not say he met, he talked to, he conversed with. He found out that they both love God. They thought that together they could do greater things for Yahweh than apart. No. He saw. What is his view of women? Right? And then, when he does marry her, you know, the whole riddle story thing, he doesn't tell her the riddle. And she says, you hate me, you don't love me, you've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me an answer. And get this, ladies, imagine yourself on your honeymoon and your new husband says this to you. I haven't even explained it to my father or mother, so why should I explain it to you? Hopefully I don't have to explain this to you, right? Do you see the problem here? I mean, whatever happened to leave and cleave? Leave your mom and dad so that the most important person in your life becomes the one with whom you are one. And he doesn't even get that. And he goes down here and he says, if you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't solve my riddle. Oh, I bet she was flattered by that. He called me a cow, isn't it? You know? And then look what happens to her. Eventually what happens to her is she gets burned up, right, by the Philistines. So he catches 300 foxes and puts fire in their tails and sends them out to the grain, which is kind of a neat trick. But the trouble is, the Philistines went and burned her and her father to death. Now here's the amazing thing again, how are women treated in the story? If you're going to be next to Samson, here's what happens to you. Right? I mean, it's a really ugly, ugly, ugly story. But it's not even as ugly as this. And this is one we've talked about just a little bit. One day Samson went to Gaza where he saw a prostitute. Now here's the most amazing part of this whole thing. The text just says this in such an incredibly matter-of-fact way. One day he went to Gaza. Now you know, again, because you've studied geography, because you've looked at this, you realize, okay, wait a minute, where actually are we? And the answer is we're way down here, 40 miles away, right? You don't just one day go to, why is he going to Gaza? Well, because there's a prostitute there. And as we've discussed before, this whole thing is an amazing statement of the power of the Spirit that is available to him that he chooses not to use to say no to the prostitute. What is he doing here? And as you look at it, you say he's using the power of the Spirit for his own selfish, stupid, self-preserving ends and not for the glory of God. Well, how does God let him do that? Because God gives all of us gifts and abilities and says, here, go ahead and use them, and sits back and sees what we do. And this is what he does. This is what he does.